Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now, even though the weather isn't brilliant, there's no doubt about it, it does feel like the holiday season. Nevertheless, there are lots of jobs to do, and there's no doubt that summer is gently slipping away. So it's important to relish every second of it. This week, Carol goes to Dorset to revel in the sheer artistry of water lilies.
And it's these beautiful flowers which inspired some of the most celebrated paintings in the world.
And we have another masterpiece. This one is a wall garden in North Yorkshire. It's a perfect example of how to create a grand display in a small space.
Any art, and gardening is an art, then I think that's what it's about, blowing people's minds or blowing them out of their seats.
That's a very gentle weed. I confess that this wall has been pretty much neglected since I planted it in March. It's a wall that I hadn't used for 20 years, and it's a pity because it's a west-facing wall, very handsome, and the perfect background for a whole range of plants, particularly because west-facing walls, as well as being quite warm, tend to be wetter than others, and dryness at the feet of a wall is a problem. So if you're planting against the base of a wall, do remember to water. Now, what I've looked for here was to get a combination of plants that will give me flowers from spring right through to autumn. And I've used roses and clematis to that effect. So we've got a clematis here, alba luxurians, little delicate flowers, slightly tinged with mauve, which are lovely, and coming into their own, and they'll go on flowering for another month or so. There's a Rosa New Dawn, which is a really good old favourite, and rightly so. You have this lovely flower which will go on from June into October or even November, and almost evergreen leaves. In time, that will cover the whole of that area and work with the clematis. Another clematis here, which is John Huxtable, rather larger flowers. That's been going now for about 3 weeks. Another rose here, Madame Alfred Carrière, which does its best stuff earlier in the season and is delicate but got a sort of fulsome body, and that will work in along this area. And then finally, Clematis paniculata, not grown it before, and this is a froth of white flowers. It's a little on the tender side, but I'm hoping it will come up here into the tree. So the combination of the plants should work well, and where they are now, after this slightly chilly, wet summer, is actually fine. They're doing exactly what I would hope they would. Thank you very much. I need that. You can't have it. Now, this is a rose that really does need some action, and it needs it now. It's a Rambler called Paul's Himalayan Musk. But if I get in there, I can show you. And the reason I'm wearing a thick coat and I've got these big gauntlets is because it's awfully prickly. And these tendrils have a habit of snagging you, and then it's difficult to get out. You can see this. This is very typical Rambler growth. There's probably about 4 foot of it that's all grown this year, and it's arching and loose and brilliant for scrambling up trees and old buildings, and that's where Ramblers look their best. Whereas a climber's growth tends to be a bit more structured, and you establish a framework, and then the new shoots will be more upright. So Rambler, lots of small flowers, produce once, usually in July, and then that's it. Whereas climbers tend to have bigger flowers, and many of them will go on flowering all summer. And then the other really big difference, which is why you need to prune Ramblers now, is that Ramblers produce their flowers on the previous season's wood. So this shoot here will bear next year's flowers, whereas climbers tend to produce their flowers on the current season's wood. So you could prune a climber as late as May and still have flowers. Prune a Rambler any later than August, and you may be cutting off next year's flowers. However, having said that, I don't want to be spiked every time I come in the border. I need to restrain this thing.
Ow!
Ramblers will flower perfectly well without any pruning at all, but they do get out of hand. Pruning as soon as they finish flowering allows the new growth, which will produce next year's flowers, time to ripen. Look at that. This is all this year's growth. And if you've got a pergola or a fence, I suggest looking at a climber before a rambler. They're more easily constrained, and in fact they're better for it. But if you've got a rambler, and they are glorious, now is the time to prune it if you're going to. Doesn't need it, but you may well want to stop it spiking you every time you pass. Do it this weekend. Get on with it. Now, if you're not pruning this weekend and you fancy a day off from the garden, then visiting another garden is the next best thing. And the RHS, as well as having its major gardens, has 147 partner gardens. In fact, it's got another 23 abroad too. And we went along to North Yorkshire to visit one of them, which is a town garden that unfolds to reveal a vast array of treasures.
The site is so perfect. The terraces, the steps, the river in the background, the landscape beyond. People might think, well, it's about 1/3 of an acre, that's not a very big garden. But in fact, we've probably got as much stuff in the garden, as much interest as many gardens which are 10 acres. I would say the real signature mark of the garden is the intensity of planting. Every little nook and cranny has got something in it. Like many people, we overfilled the space, and we've spent probably the last 30 years taking things out. So, heartbreaking as it is, we've had to get rid of a...
We've been taking things out, but didn't you buy 23 new hostas this winter?
Yes, I did. That's my passion.
I tend to be the decider of plants to buy and where to put them. So a sort of designer, and I really enjoy that.
I can move a plant around or a pot around and it doesn't seem quite right, and he'll come out and say 5 inches to the left or 6 inches back, and it looks spot on, damn it. So he's got that designer's eye.
One of the great things we're blessed with is walls and paving, which is taken out from what were the kitchens below, put out into the garden. So you've got this sort of very hard stone, York stone, gravel, high walls, and all those textures of green and shapes, which is just a joy. Austin's the doer. Once they're in, he looks after them. He's very much a sort of tender of plants.
This is Comtesse de Bouchaud, and it's going around these lovely campanulas, which are standing up beautifully this morning, and the Clematis is finding its own way up, a natural support there, look, which is rather fun. And the great thing about this technique is that instead of it being on artificial trellis work, it's just falling around naturally, and it will flower all over this area. This kind of slightly anarchic approach would irritate lots of people, I think, enormously. To keep it looking natural is a complete artifice, and you've got to really, there's a lot of work. You don't want it to look perfect, but you don't want it to be running away with you and on top of you.
We're maybe rather old-fashioned. Our style is almost an Edwardian style of just exuberance and roses and very full and crazy.
The top roses for me would be, I think, Maygold, which is on the balcony of the garden. It's actually planted at ground level, but it's right up onto the balcony. It's disease-free, almost. The flowers are beautiful in the bud. It's beautiful when it opens. Secondly, I would have to say probably the centrepiece of the garden is Rosa helenae, which is a Himalayan climber. It's huge and it almost dominates the gardens.
And then the scent fills the garden.
Scent fills the garden.
Early July,
yeah.
First half of July.
because of the walls and because of the aspect, which is south-southeast, the perfume of the garden on a warm, still day is just mind-blowing. We've often, thought, let's have a 20-acre garden, and now I think, thank God, we've got a third of an acre. But I call this a glorified window box. I don't really want 15 more acres whilst he's doing his Sudoku and I'm working on the garden.
Several years ago, a nun came to the door and said, "Is this your garden?" "Yes." "Oh, it's just wonderful. I feel anointed all over with holy oils."
I said, time to go back to the convent, sister.
But hopefully it gives people that sense of uplift.
Yeah, she'd been wowed. She'd been completely wowed, which is really what I said we were trying to aim to do with people, is to blow them away.
I think that's a really good example of how a relatively small space has an energy and an intensity because it's packed with plants, and you just can't achieve that in a big garden. Now, do go along and see it for yourself. It's open every day from now to October, and you can get all the details from our website. Talk to any vegetable grower and the first thing they'll tell you is what a hard year it's been, how difficult it's been with this weather. But the truth is, you deal with the weather you're given. There's nothing you can do about it. However, the runner beans have loved the weather. Runner beans like warm, wet weather. And whilst it hasn't been hot, it hasn't been particularly cold. And the wet is exactly their cup of tea. And this is a variety called White Lady, and due for picking. Now, I'm not interested in growing vegetable that's bigger than anyone else. What I'm really concerned with is that it tastes good. And so I don't mind picking runner beans when they're quite small. And if you keep picking them, rather like sweet peas, they will keep producing more of these lovely beans. These were plants raised indoors and planted out. And it's interesting that they are considerably ahead of the ones that I planted direct. Another crop that has benefited from the cool, wet weather is celery. Celery really likes it wet. And this is a self-branching variety. It's still got plenty of growth in it, but no reason why we can't start harvesting it now. And the easiest way to do that is with a knife and just cut it right across. Now, the plants are still quite small, so you're not going to get the great big stems that you can buy, but really delicious when cooked, and the fragrance of the celery is really intense. Now, I think delicious too. That'll be good. And those should go on growing quite happily into autumn, just like the runner beans. And if it dries out a lot, then it is important to keep watering them. You can see these tomato leaves are all rolled up like that, and it's much worse nearer the door. And as you come down the greenhouse, you get less and less of it, and that's because it's caused by temperature fluctuations. And the difference between the cold of the nights and the hot of the day, which obviously is going to be worse near the open door, will cause the leaves to roll up. It won't affect the crop, so don't worry about it if you've got it. What is worth doing is pinching out the tops. You can see the tops of these have been cut off, and that will stop new trusses forming and allow the existing trusses of fruit a better chance of ripening. But we have been picking them for the last 3 weeks, and they're very good. They've not been bad at all. This is a new variety on me. It's Mave de Marché, and it's absolutely delicious. I'll definitely grow this again. We've probably picked about 30-odd fruits. They're not huge. They've got that lovely, warm, tomatoey smell that you can only get from a greenhouse. And it's the warmth that gives them taste. Now, it's not been a hot summer, but the taste is still good. The sugars are fairly concentrated. Well, with any luck, these tomatoes will go on ripening steadily over the next month or two. The only thing to really watch out for is blight, because all my potatoes have got blighted, and tomatoes, of course, are close cousins of potatoes and can get hit by blight. However, very unlikely inside the greenhouse. Now, talking of potatoes, I asked you if you'd had any experiences with growing first earlies. And remember, I did a taste test a month or so ago, and I've had massive replies. And here are just a few of them. And it does seem that there were lots of very varied experiences across different parts of the country, but one or two common threads came through. And those of you that grew Winston, just as I did, also found that they grew absolutely enormous for first early potatoes, but not many are as big as this one from Andy, from Gislingham in Suffolk. A potato looking to be about half the size of Andy himself. But the general theme that comes through this very mixed response is that one, Aaron Pilot did particularly well as a first early, and two, that those of you who grew Charlotte, which is a second early, loved it. Now, I've got one more thing I want to harvest. This is a small variety of cucumber called La Diva, and it proves to be a perfect size. I grow cucumbers in pots and have done so for the last few years with great success. It's really no trouble at all. The secret of cucumbers is they like as much warmth as you can give them and as much moisture and richness as well. These are large pots that I've had for years and years, and they're half filled with garden compost, half with potting compost. And I water these at least once a day, and if it's at all warm, twice a day. A really good soak. And they thrive. And by the way, I like hot cucumber too. You just cut it into four, fry it in a bit of butter for a few minutes, so it's just got a little bit crispy on the outside. Add some cream, salt and pepper, some chopped parsley or mint or whatever herbs you've got to hand, and it's absolutely delicious. A couple of weeks ago, I cleared the silkweed from the pond and put in some oxygenators. And I'm pleased with the way that it's reacted. There's a little bit of weed back, but that's because I left some in. I just didn't manage to get it all out. But believe you me, if I hadn't put any oxygenators in, I reckon that would have blanketed the whole area. Because once it starts spreading, it really grows fast. So that's the result. I'm very pleased with that. I'll tell you another really good thing, is that the water lilies have produced a bud. Now that's pretty exceptional in the first year. Normally you would expect that to happen in year 2 or even year 3 sometimes. So I can't wait to see that open. Not very dramatic, just one small flower, but it's all part of the excitement of the pond. Now if you do want to see dramatic water lilies, or dramatic plants of any kind, you need to go and see a national collection. And Carol has been down to Dorset to see a national collection of water lilies.
So far in this series, I've been looking at wildflowers who've got their roots firmly in the ground, terrestrial plants. But today, I want to look at something which occupies an entirely different element, that of water. It's the water lilies, Nymphaeaceae. They take their name from the Greek word for Nymphaea, a water nymph, a mythological creature who lived in rivers, streams, ponds, lakes. And it's these beautiful flowers which inspired some of the most celebrated paintings in the world. Claude Monet's Les Nymphaeas, the water lilies. Of course, his water lilies were in his pools and ponds at Giverny. They were cultivated varieties, but those lilies, and all our water lilies, have their roots firmly in the wild. You'd hardly believe that this exotic-looking plant is indigenous to the British Isles. It's one of only a couple of species that we have as wildflowers. It's an extremely vigorous plant. When it's left to its own devices, it will just take over any stretch of water it can find and cover it with these great green pads and these exotic white flowers. Think of water lilies and you imagine a whole array of colours that goes far beyond yellow and white. This is down to the life's work of one passionate Frenchman. Joseph Marliac devoted his life to the water lily. Using wild species as his starting point, he developed and hybridised over 110 new cultivars in a kaleidoscopic range of colour. Here at Bennett's Water Garden, Jonathan Bennett knows all about how this incredible colour range was developed. So what did he start off with then?
I believe he started off with the wild white alba water lily.
Yeah.
And he also imported the Mexicana yellow from South America.
Right.
And I think that was the magic ingredient because the plants that he got together there were capable of producing seed in the climate that he brought them together in, which is in the south of France.
Yeah.
Lovely warm climate.
Look at this, isn't this beautiful?
Yeah.
And you must love them too, Jonathan.
Yes, I mean, I've been working with him for so many years now, but
Yeah.
if you have to throw the plant away because it's in the wrong place, it's a weed, you still have to save the flower and pop it in water because it will carry on open for a few more days, and such a beautiful thing. There you go. It's a beautiful colour, isn't it?
Such perfection. What are the roots like? Apart from being ugly.
Yeah, the chunks of rhizome down there, and then they've got the fine roots that spread right out through the mud. In this situation, they'll be spreading miles away from the plant.
Bring in the food.
That's it.
Extract any nutrient from the base. And what about the leaves? They make a contribution too.
Oh yeah, they're the food factory of the plant, and I think the unique thing with the aquatics is that they're actually taking air down to the roots. There's not much air down in the mud.
Right.
And the stems have got these little
tubes.
That's it.
Yeah.
Pull air
So it's
through.
not just photosynthesis, it's
dragging some air in as well. Yeah.
So which one is this? This is a Marliac one too?
It is, yeah. This one's called Herman, and it's almost brilliant white, and it's grown for the. Well, I think the unique thing is about the star shape of the flowers, and those lovely apple green leaves.
Something tells me this is a special favourite
It
of
is,
yours.
yeah. I've got this one in my garden pond at home.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's a really good
Yeah,
recommendation.
it is. Yeah.
When you've got the pick of how many?
Oh yeah, about 180 varieties.
Oh, is
yeah,
that all?
That's right. Yeah. This is escabucal.
Escabucal, what a lovely name.
It's difficult to say. It's a slow grower,
Yeah.
and it doesn't produce many side shoots.
Right.
So therefore it won't fill the pond up so quickly.
Joseph Marliac's breeding programme continued apace, but he needed somewhere a broader platform to exhibit what he'd achieved so far. The opportunity arose when, towards the end of the century, in 1889, the World Fair was held in Paris, and he took his water lilies there and showed them off to huge public acclaim. One of the people who saw them there was the painter Claude Monet. He fell in love with them. He wanted to grow them, but more than that, he wanted to paint them. But just imagine what those paintings of Giverny would have been like if it hadn't been for the work of Joseph Marliac in creating this wonderful range of beautiful colours and forms. In fact, they might well have contained only white and yellow wild water lilies.
When I planted these water lilies, I set them up on layers of bricks because The idea is to have the water lily foliage just sitting on the surface. And if you've got deep water and a short plant, that's obviously not going to happen. You put them on the bottom and it's completely submerged. So by jacking it up, that gives it a chance to get the maximum light. And then as they grow, you can lure them down. Now, if I lift this one up here, you can see that it's well clear of the water. I could drop that by about 6 inches. And as long as 1 or 2 of the leaves are floating on the surface, the others can be below the water level. Now, the base of the pond is sloping and it's quite slippery, so I don't want to go falling over, which I'm sure would provide good entertainment, but not the desired effect. Move that to one side, and set it down there, and then grovel around under the water for bricks. I put the bricks inside a plastic container so that they wouldn't fall over and damage the liner. There are 2. Right, 2 more. Right. See, that leaf is floating on the surface, as is that one, and just about that one. So that's perfect. Still 1 brick to take out, and then it'll be sitting on the bottom. And I don't have to do that this year. This can stay all winter if need be, if they don't grow any more. But that now will encourage it to grow more and get more established and to spread out. Now, I'm going to move that one as well, but if you don't have a pond, here are some jobs you can still be getting on with this weekend. Well, that's it for this week, but I'll see you the same time next Friday. Bye-bye.
Barbed wire fences divide, but hope and humanity unite next on BBC Two from an acclaimed novel, The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. you.